On this episode, we fall deep down the Moebius rabbit hole and take a trip to the world of Edena.
Hello and welcome to Panelism, the podcast where we talk about comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Todd A.
Taylor Trask. And Todd, it is March
already.
2021. I know. I that's exactly my point. I was, we're on a good, fairly decent schedule, but Jesus, it's already March. Like, this is the year that I kind of thought would, maybe slow down a little bit and we'd have our reprieve from last year, and it's like, nope. Pedal to the metal. So here we are with another episode.
Yeah. And as you talked about in the intro to the show, we're doing a Moebius book that you have chosen that you have talked about him several times on the show.
Yes.
Him, them. I'm not actually sure if it's a person or a conglomerate. Did you see that there's a Moebius Humble Bundle right now?
Oh my God, no.
Just wanted to ruin your week.
How appropriate. Oh, Lord.
Yeah. I don't even know if it'll be active by the time this episode airs, but for you, Taylor.
Well, hey,
there it is.
For those of you, those listeners out there who've never seen Humble Bundle, give them a quick pitch.
Yes.
Like, what is it?
So humblebundle.com works with publishers, game studios, tabletop studios, to create a bundle of like a work on a theme. So we've talked about there's like an Image Comics bundle from time to time. In this case, there's a Moebius comics bundle, or they'll just be like here's a bundle of PC games. You get to donate, like there's sort of like generally tiers that you donate in, and then it is a certain percentage goes to the studio or whomever donated the work, and then part of it goes to a charity for that month. So, and actually I think what they're doing now I don't know that there's a weekly new bundles, but I know they changed their release day. So it's like Tuesdays or when you look for the new bundles to come out. So you and I have both done this thing. Like my TBR pile is ridiculous because I wanted, it was like for $15, I got so many Image Comics graphic novels where I wanted, a good 5 of them or something. And this was definitely cheaper than getting that many. But now I've got, 37 more graphic novels to read.
It's amazing. And granted, they're all digital, which is not a bad thing. And they're open source, which is an even better thing. But it's, it does, I don't know. I think Humble Bundle for me is a great way. If you've ever wanted to sort of sample the wares of a particular publisher or author, this is the great way to do it. Like I famously now bought last year's Humble Bundle of the Humanoids had one, and I just grabbed it all. I went to the top tier, like $20. I basically got the entire Humanoids catalog, which is amazing. But then you have to spend the time going through it, and at the same time you're helping a great cause. So it's not like you could just give the money and not get anything. But it's kind of fun to get something for it, and something that's as cool as these niche or sort of harder to find comics. Yeah,
and I'll tell you, by the time this episode comes out, this Humble Bundle is done.
That's correct.
For you, Taylor, go get it.
Yes, I will be doing that as soon as we're done talking. But today's book is one I have been wanting to review for quite some time, and have put it off because I have, as I mentioned in previous episodes, I have a top tier shelf of books that I think that I'm going to go through this year for sure. But I've been putting them off because they are heavier books mentally. They are more intricate. I really want to do them justice in talking about them. And so I've been kind of waiting. And this is the year that I'm just going to go through them all. So you're going to get, Todd, as a co-host, you're going to get some deep dives into books that you've either been curious about or have know nothing about.
Yeah.
Like today's book, and then listeners at home too. I think this is a great, this will be sort of my higher, like my more literary kind of reviews that I've been holding off. So hopefully I do them justice. We kicked off the year with a book kind of like that. I did the Frank Herbert Dune graphic novel, which came out. But this episode, I'm doing The World of Edena by Moebius, and that's spelled Edena, not Edina, not Edina. It's Edena. Think about the Garden of Eden with an A after it. And I apologize ahead of time. I have crazy allergies, and so my nose is running. I sound stuffy. If you hear any residual sniffing, that's what's going on.
It's great, right? We went from like the dead of winter to like spring, just instantly, no transition.
Yeah. And by the dead of winter, we mean like, we just came out of the week where Texas basically froze to death. And so that's where we are in the timeline. If you're listening in the future and it's the utopia or dystopia have set in, that's where we are right now. We're here. So, The World of Edena, let me just jump in. I'm going to give you the basics. If you want to be cool and French about it, you can call it Le Monde d'Edena, because Jean Giraud, otherwise known as Moebius, is French. Okay. It was written and illustrated by Moebius, and the color is by him too. And this particular book was published by Dark Horse a couple years ago. It was the first release under Dark Horse's Moebius Library project. So Dark Horse got the rights to all his work, and they have all these grand ambitions to publish it all over time. Wow! And they've already put out a bunch of great books, and this was the very, very first one. And grabbed it as soon as I saw it. The cover, if you have, I guess, physical or digital, it doesn't matter. The cover's amazing. It's very evocative. It's a really great image. It kind of shows you, gives you a sampling of what to expect. There's a guy in a bubble kind of hovercraft going over a forest on potentially some alien world. Gives you really kind of a good idea of what it is. This series, by the way, consists of 5 parts. Each of them were published many years ago as separate volumes, and then there was a 6th volume, and they each make up a part of this grand narrative. The 6th volume is related, but it's a little bit more hodgepodge.
So when you say volumes, is it sort of like each volume is roughly the length of a trade paperback or graphic novel?
Yeah, I would say so, because he started the first part was published in 1983, and the last part was published in 2001. So this was a body of work that he was toying with on and off throughout his whole career. And yeah, I would say I'm just kind of holding maybe a slightly thinner trade paperback. Think of what a European trade paperback might be, and you'd have this. Now each of these parts has won awards, gained notoriety, but they were never collected in one cohesive volume before this, I believe. I think Marvel might have had something to do with republishing it in the mid 90s. But for all intents and purposes, this is sort of the definitive collection of the Edena series. It was meant to also be a starting place for Moebius to develop his kind of a Moebius universe. Much like Jodorowsky has stories and comics that all kind of fit in the same world, like the Inkle and the Meta Barons and Techno Priest are all part of the same quote unquote Jodoverse. Moebius was kind of trying to do the same thing with varying levels of success. I don't think he quite went as far as Jodorowsky did. And I mentioned Jodo specifically because he was a heavy creative partner with Moebius throughout most of their career. They met, of course, famously on the set of the Jodorowsky Dune movie, and went on to create a bunch of comics and stuff together, and many other things too.
And just to, you had briefly mentioned the Humanoids label at the top of this. They were both published by Humanoids in Europe and America?
Yes. Again, this book is Dark Horse, but both authors or both creators are very heavily involved with Humanoids. In fact, as I'm looking at this Humble Bundle, Todd, that you mentioned earlier, there's some Humanoids published things there too by Jean Giraud. Real quick, so if you aren't familiar with Moebius, his real name is Jean Giraud. He's a French bande dessinée artist, and really known, I think, worldwide for his speed. He's just a very, very fast illustrator, and just he has a very distinctive style that has been aped many, many times, either intentionally or just through inspiration. So you have seen his work many times. Maybe you didn't know it, maybe you did. One of the things that he's most famous for is heavy metal, that late 60s, early 70s sort of music video thing that I don't even know how to describe heavy metal,
right.
But the illustration is him. So if you've seen that, if you are familiar with the Western comic Blueberry, that's him too. He's done a bunch of just different things, and like I said, of course, his involvement with Jodorowsky is pretty huge. He illustrated the Inkle, which I'll be talking about on a future episode. So check him out. Sadly, passed away in 2012, but has just an amazing body of work. And this really kind of gets you into his mind. It was really cool to see. I think the biggest surprise just out of the gate was that this was not a collaboration. This was 100% him. Writing, illustrating, colors, this was all him. So usually he's paired with somebody who's somebody's doing the writing, somebody's doing the directing, someone's conceiving of something that he's working on. So this was cool to see, from his own mind. This is what you got. If you like, any of his other work, the Inkle, Blueberry, if you like any of those kind of, I'll just call them dreamy European stories, for lack of a better word. I would even say some of the Studio Ghibli movies. If you like those, this is going to be a weird one, but if you like the Pixar movie Soul, which just came out, okay. I think all of those references are good kind of points of view to like this book. They will orient you in the right way.
Is that mostly because of story perspective, or because Soul I'm familiar with, and that has a lot of really trippy animation that goes from so are you talking more from that animation standpoint where it sort of jumps genres, or from the story standpoint?
I would say in Soul, spoilers, sort of, not spoilers, when they're in the afterlife, everything kind of gets very heightened and very dreamy and very surreal. That's the reference I'm thinking of. Even the soundtrack, the Trent Reznor, Atticus Ross soundtrack, when they're in the afterworld, it's kind of almost like a dreamy Tron kind of soundtrack. That's literally the soundtrack I would put to this book. It just has that kind of otherworldly but familiar but dreamy, nostalgic kind of quality to it. One of the things that really jumped out at me, just even seeing the cover, but then as I was thumbing through it before I bought it, it was very clear to me. It reminds me of dreams I've had, the visuals of it, the layout, the pacing. There's some very abstract things that happen without any text at all, that things change and morph, and it has a very dreamy quality to it, especially in the beginning parts of it. So all of that, if you like those things, I think you'll like this book. And honestly, if you're a fan of Moebius in any way, shape, or form, grab this, because I think it's one of his seminal works. Right up there with Inkle, right up there with all his stuff. I think I'm glad it's collected in this way, because it will get more appreciated and more noticed as the years go on. Even though a lot of these stories, like I said, have won awards. Part of it won an Eisner back in '91. So take that. Take from that what you will. Let me jump in the story.
I wanted to back you up right there. You said part of this one in Eisner, so one of the 5 parts. Do you know were these ever released as single issues before they made up a part, or did he sort of publish it as a complete?
No.
Part?
They were all published as they came out.
Okay.
So I think the publishing history is 83, 89, 92. He just kept kind of noodling on it as time went on. And then the last one, like I said, came out in 2001, 2002. Is there? No, 2001.
2001.
Yep. Pardon me. So yeah, the one that came out, I think in 87 or 88, won an Eisner in 89 or 90. And there's some other awards that have each of these parts have garnered awards over the years. So here's the story, and this is why this was so tricky for me to do a review on, because it's very long. And it kind of, because he wrote it in sort of in this choppy kind of way, over the course of time, it's not the most cohesive. The main characters will appear in all parts, but you can tell each part kind of follows what he was interested in his own life at that period of time. Even though the story, there is a cohesive narrative, but it weaves and it kind of changes focus based on what he was interested in. So that's kind of prevented me from really trying to jump into this. I'm just going to read some notes I prepared here, and some of this is off of Wikipedia. In the initial story, so part 1, Moebius introduces 2 genderless protagonists called Stel and I'm just going to pronounce it Atan. Others have pronounced it Aten, but Atan. So Stel and Atan, they crash on a barren planet. This is in some galaxy far, far away, a long time ago, or whenever. They eventually stumble on a camp of interstellar refugees surrounding a mysterious pyramid, and then Stel and Atan are transported to an unknown world described as, quote, a Garden of Eden somewhere in another galaxy. And so that's how part 1 opens. It's introducing these 2 characters. They find this kind of this remnant of refugees, and then they get transported via this pyramid to this other world. And it's a beautiful sequence.
Is this like a Hickman thing where we're searching for symbols in all of this? Like the fact that there's a pyramid there, are we tying that to some symbology around pyramids?
I mean, I'm sure. Like, okay. I don't think there's any kind of like conspiratorial cult thing here at all. I don't think it's that. This is not a commentary on society in that way. I'll note this too. Wikipedia, and I forgot this. The open ending of the first story, so it ends with them getting transported. That actually inspired Moebius to wonder what would happen next, because he hadn't necessarily thought through the whole thing. So then he plotted out 3 or 4 more books worth of stories that were conceived as the basis for this kind of coherent Moebius universe. And then there was supposed to be a crossover with one of his other works, like The Airtight Garage, and some other things too. So the main characters throughout the whole thing are Stel and Atan, and it's their relationship that really drives the story. So he wrote that first part. They get to Edena. He didn't really that was kind of the end. And then he thought, I wonder what does happen to these 2. And so that was the genesis for him continuing on with parts 3, 4, and 5 over the course of 2 decades. Now, Stel and Atan, they get to Edena, and they're the only 2 people there. And because they have been in a society that, it's very manufactured. It's very, it's very Jetsons-y. Like they don't eat real food. Everything is very controlled. Even, the things that they put in their bodies and their minds are very controlled. So like part of their genderless kind of nature is because the society that they are from is very homogenized, very stifling, etc. This is an interesting little factoid. So Moebius was strongly influenced by the teachings of Jean-Paul Appel-Guéry, who was, he had a commune in Tahiti, and Moebius joined him there in 83, 84 when he was writing part 1. He was also really into nutritionist stuff at the time. He was kind of a transient, Moebius was at the time. So some of these parts, he wrote The Gardens of Edena. He drew it in Tokyo and then also in Los Angeles, because that's where he spent that summer. So all of these things he was consuming went into the work. He was really interested in dreams and nutrition and health and biology and sexuality, and then especially the human desire to live in a structured society and the archetypal good and evil. So these are the themes that he weaves in. Kind of going back to your question, is there some hidden subtext in here? Yeah, there's obvious subtext, and then there's hidden stuff too, and it all kind of goes back to support the values that he was really ingesting at that time that carried with him through the rest of his life. But you get to see that in Stel and Atan. They come from this conformist society. They get to Edena, and for the first time in their lives, they're eating natural food, and they're sort of allowed to sort of explore themselves and each other and all these kinds of things. And so they become very much more man and woman, or male and female, in the classic Adam and Eve sort of scenario. And something happens. I don't want to spoil too much, at least in this case. Something happens that separates them. And Atan, the girl, she leaves, and Stel is left alone. And the entire rest of the book is Stel trying to find her again, because he realizes he loves her. Like, even the idea of love never occurred to him before, because he was never put in a position where he could think about it or care about somebody else in this way. And so he develops this sort of obsessive desire to be with Atan again. And while he's going on that adventure, she's going through all of these changes on her own. She you know, again, I don't want to spoil too much. She falls into this sort of alternative society that she becomes kind of a godlike figure for a little while, and some other things happen. So you follow the track of these two characters. And yes, there is resolution to their relationship in the very end. It's not an obvious resolution. I really liked that it wasn't so on the nose, that it was appropriate. But it does, you know, there is that, they don't just leave you wondering, you know, do they ever get back together? There's an answer to that question. But it tracks these two very different characters as, you know, from their genesis point of kind of discovering themselves. They split, and then you get to see their evolution throughout the course of the book and what drives them and what motivates them. And then how they may still be connected, even though they're physically separated, there might be something that connects them. And in that way, something that connects all of us. So there's all this kind of interesting, kind of new agey sort of stuff going on. Very philosophical in a good way, I think. And again, it really mirrors what Moebius was interested in his own life at that time.
Well, that's interesting because it seems squishier than like Hickman or or something like that, but that it's not necessarily about the hard symbols, like what does this pyramid represent, but it's more about the values and the like lifestyles or whatever that they're confronting, and these like ideas about that. Are we meant to read Edena as Eden? Like, have they traveled to the Garden of Paradise kind of thing?
I mean, that's how I read it. Like, whether it's the biblical Eden or not, I don't think matters.
Right.
In their minds and their story, it is truly, you know, it's a paradise, and it's a place for them to start anew, to sort of to leave behind. I mean, even physically, they travel via this pyramid. They travel from this planet where the refugees were to Edena, and they physically leave their old lives behind, their old spaceship, their old, you know, all the people they knew from the camp and everything. It's just them on this planet, and they literally get to figure out who they are for the first time in their lives. And that spirit, I think, is, and again, I hate to keep bringing the guy up, but I'm such a Jodorowsky fan, and I think the thing that really connected both he and Moebius together creatively was this desire to be free, this desire to break free of social conventions and cultural conventions and truly figure out who you are and what you're supposed to be doing and how that benefits humanity. And so both of those guys really liked those ideas, and they made a lot of their work about it. And so you get to see Moebius's sort of his own untainted version of that. You know, like I said, he didn't collaborate with anybody on this. So it's kind of fun to see, like, from his perspective, what does that look like? Where if you read The Inkle, for example, like, you get to see their shared perspective, and you can kind of, it's easier for me now to see where Jodo's ideas, you know, end and Moebius's begin, or vice versa. So, you know, having The World of Edena is kind of, you know, is a really nice companion book to The Inkle, because it's, you know, the illustration style is very similar, but a lot of the same ideas are there too, about renewal and discovery and, you know, the human spirit and all these kinds of things. But yeah, it's a very I like the way you said it. It's soft symbolism in a lot of ways. It is definitely social commentary, but it's also, you know, universal. He's not trying to say, you know, in the 80s, Margaret Thatcher was being kind of a, you know, it's not like that. It's like, what are the universal human characteristics that define all of us, that we all like, what's the journey we all have to go through? And in that way, it makes this work very timeless.
And do you know, like, production time-wise, was The Inkle being produced around the same time, or did this come after it? I mean, you know.
Well, it's a little hard to answer, because The Inkle also was done in phases. So that wasn't just one completed work. They did parts one, I believe, in the late 70s or early 80s. So I mean, there were definitely times when he was working on this and that concurrently.
Right.
So it would be interesting to see what ideas he was saving for this and what ideas he put into, you know, The Inkle, and vice versa. So I don't know. They feel like spiritual siblings, even though the stories do not intersect in the same universe. But you could almost imagine that maybe they do. Maybe this is, you know, they don't, even though it doesn't bring up any of the things from the Jodo verse. You know, you don't see meta barons or techno priests running around, but you could believe maybe this is part of the same future where all of these stories sort of meet at the end of the day. I do want to talk about the art though, because the Moebius style is so prominent in our culture. Like if you just Google Moebius art, you'll know exactly what it is the second you see it. It even even things like Where's Waldo have a very Moebius kind of vibe about them. And it's all line art. And he for a while when he did Blueberry and some of that early work, he was being very detailed with his drawing. And to his point, he said this later on. He didn't he didn't feel as confident in his line art as he would have then. So then he kind of made up for it with a lot of detail. With World of Edena, he decided to restrict himself to what's called a clear line style, with just minimal details. And then later on, he did add some detail, kind of going back to his more intricate signature style. But he does come back around again to this very simplistic way of drawing. I'm actually going to read for you a couple passages. He's got a great intro that he wrote himself, and then he has a bit here about the art. I'm just going to quote him here. This is from the World of Edena. He says, by forcing myself to draw, quote, upon a star, which is one of the parts, in a style as pure and simple as possible, I could no longer find refuge in an excess of details. I was obliged to work very hard on my lines and make each one count, because every true representation of anatomy, matter, and shape could only be expressed through simple lines. This prevented me from over-accumulating the kind of endless and neurotic details which often help turn a relatively mediocre panel into something interesting. It is otherwise a fairly traditional and classic method. This approach enabled me to work relatively fast and yet forced me to perfect my line work. From that standpoint, except for certain panels which I think are only just average, I am rather pleased with Upon a Star, which I consider a success. And that permeates the whole book.
And sorry to repeat, where did he write that, or where did you read that?
This is in the intro. So there's a nice intro from his point of view, and then it kind of cuts in from some other commentary. So right at the beginning of the collected work, you get to see this kind of stuff. Cool. He also has another thing earlier on in the intro. I just want to read this too because I really like this. This really kind of gives you a sense of his point of view. He says, I never give the keys to my stories. My stories are not like a box of spaghetti, and they don't come with instructions on how long you must put them in boiling water before you eat. I deliberately never help anyone, because if I do that, I feel I'm undercutting the pleasure of the reader, one's freedom to find in my stories what they find interesting. Besides, if I'm so proud of my work, it must be allowed to stand alone. I must tell the reader, I've done my part, now it's your turn to be creative. So like just that really sets up, I think, what you're about to get into in the book, but just also who he was as an artist. Like I love that sensibility. He wasn't so, a lot of creators, and rightfully so, are sort of authoritarian. It's like my vision is this, and I want you to see it as I'm seeing it. And even, I've gotten that way from time to time. I like that he was not so precious about it, and in fact, even encouraging that it's like, look, you have what I've done. Now it's yours to take and make your own. And it's loose enough, and a lot of the subtext is kind of I'll say again loose enough where you really can, you and I could read this, and while we'd share some similar perceptions of it, I think you might take away other things than I would take away, or vice versa. So I like that he encourages that and made it set the book up so it's not so literal that you can't have interesting discussions about it.
Right. And not to keep bringing him up, but it almost feels like with Hickman, and maybe it's just a magic trick he's playing on the reader. You're like, I know all these dots connect somehow,
Yeah.
You're sitting there trying to put it together, which I think is what he wants you to do, even if there isn't a grand master plan. That's how it's written, is for you to do that. So it's cool to hear that this is not like that it's a journey that you can kind of explore on your own, rather than feeling like this is the destination you have to reach.
Oh, 100%. And it reminds you just going into a really great museum or an art gallery where it's like, you can go at your own pace.
Right.
You can, there's a little placard there that kind of gives you what the artist was thinking, but otherwise it's on you to make your own conclusions about the work and how it affects you. And even the way in which you go through the museum, like there's no set line on the floor that you have to follow. You can kind of hunt and peck at your leisure. So like this is a lot like that, which is, when you can get a hybrid of the museum experience and the comic experience, like that's my sweet spot. That's the kind of book that I will go after every time, where I can reread it every year and come away with something new and interesting, or it feels fresh every time. Where it's like, oh man, like it's not so ingrained in my mind that it becomes like The Office, where you can watch it so much it just becomes like white noise. Like this is engaging. And again, I'll say, even after rereading it for this episode, the thing that just continues to strike me is that it feels so dreamlike. The characters themselves, Stell and Eitan, are having dreams within dreams in the book. You don't necessarily always know if what they're seeing is real or in their own imaginations, but the whole thing plays and looks and feels like a dream I've had. It feels like it's just otherworldly and sort of non-literal enough where you could just it kind of takes you back to that dream space. You can almost feel your subconscious kind of poke through a little bit as you're going through it.
I wanted to go back to the museum point you made. Talk about the packaging of this.
Yeah.
And,
so
I'm assuming you're one question we always ask is digital versus print. This sounds like for sure a print artifact.
Well, interestingly, I own it both ways because
nice.
I grabbed it digitally first because I didn't know if I was going to, I hate to say this, but I didn't know at that time if I was going to like it enough to like want it a physical version too, because I just didn't know Moebius on his own what I was in for. Like, were the images I was seeing as previews, were they just, were they all the book was and then everything else was kind of Because sometimes you see a great splash image and a great cover and you're like, well, this will be cool. And you get into it, you're like, oh, this really doesn't carry those ideas through. I was, completely wrong about even assuming that. So grabbed it digitally, but you definitely, I think, want to own the physical hardcover edition. The pages are not oversized, but they're nice and big. The panels themselves, I don't think there's ever a place where they put any more than 4 panels or maybe 5 on a single page. Oftentimes it's like 3 panels a page. So they really give the images space to breathe. And unlike other comics too, like the way the layout happens is such that like you can turn a page and like all the panels have a blue color scheme. You turn the page again and maybe they have a yellow color scheme. So stylistically, you're not looking at something where you're distracted by the panels surrounding any one frame. There's a cohesiveness to it. So I'm just flipping through it now, you really get a rhythm, like a visual rhythm as you go through. So I actually think, get it digitally if you need it that way, but I don't think guided view is going to give you anything that's better than this. I don't think it's to your benefit to see only one panel at a time. You kind of want it, you kind of want to be washed away in just the visual aesthetic of what's going on. Like you see one amazing panel that's really kind of otherworldly and dreamy, and you kind of want the rest of it surrounding surrounding that visual cue. You don't want to just be focusing on one thing. It's not a movie or a storyboard in that way. So I heavily recommend you get the full version. The colors, they painstakingly, got the colors to match the original art prints. Really cool. Even though Moebius is dead, his wife was involved too. So like Dark Horse did a really, really good job adapting this and just taking care to make sure that this truly represented his vision and how the work should be really represented. So grab it physically if you're interested at all. Grab it physically, but if you wanted to just sample it, I'm sure digitally is fine. I still have my copy.
Cool. Any parting words on this?
Oh, man, it's hard because I would love to give, I would love to give more on the story.
Right.
And I think that if I do, this would either be a 3-hour episode or I would just butcher the story. And I don't think, the story beats themselves are are very important, but knowing that going in is not, I don't think that's going to make or break your wanting to get this book. Knowing that there's a particular character that it behaves in a certain way, I don't think it's none of that's going to matter. I think you're going to see some really just inventive, spaceships and settings and scenes and people. And really at the end of the day, the story is about Stel and Atan and their relationship, and, even how one person can misinterpret what a relationship is, read too much into certain things, to obsess about certain things, while at the same time, maybe you are a soulmate with somebody. Like that's the story. Everything else is kind of the mechanism that facilitates that. And you get to go to some really fun places and realms in between. But, don't get too caught up in like, what is it about? And, where does it end? Like that's not this kind of book. Like this is really one of those, I hate to keep saying it, this is not meant to be a pejorative, but like it's a European sensibility.
Right.
It's not the black and white paint by numbers approach that a lot of American work, for better or worse, gets into. It's very heady. You're going to want to definitely not have some distractions when you read this. Grab a great cup of coffee or a great glass of scotch or something, and just really let this take you on a journey. Let it take you somewhere you didn't expect to go before, because I think that's the power of this particular book. That's when you're working with a master like Moebius, who only come around once in a lifetime, like both in terms of talent and unique style, and then even just sensibility. Like that, this is they broke the mold when they made this guy. So like, be comfortable and feel safe in what he's trying to do and what he's where he's trying to take you.
Right. And so when you've mentioned like the Moebius universe, do you feel like like all of those Moebius works are tied together just thematically, or are there really characters and stories that cross over?
Sadly, I have not read enough of his work to know for sure. Right. So like in the Edena stuff, it's all connected story-wise and character-wise. Yeah. But, does this tie into heavy metal? Does this tie into any of the books that I'm going to consume on his Humble Bundle? There's another thing that Dark Horse has put out. There's a part 1 and part 2 called Inside Moebius, which is kind of a illustrated diary of sorts. And in that, I know you do see characters from both this and other works that he's done. So that's kind of his dark tower of sorts that kind of connects everything. Right. Even though it's sort of a commentary on his own life and his own work. Otherwise, I don't know. That will be bring that up to me again later in the year after I've read a few more of these pieces, because I feel like they're all self-contained. I think, this was the attempt to try to make a shared universe creatively, gotcha. But I think when he finished, it was like, well, it can be its own thing. And if there's casual links to other stories or other works, that's great, but he's not going to go out of his way to try to make this character, a key character in another book entirely.
Interesting. So I know you've mentioned humanoids several times in different episodes. I am positive that you reviewed Inkle or something called like the New Inkle or something like that at one point, but going through our archives, I could not find it. I know you talked about A Land Called Tarot in episode number 61. And so I would just encourage people to go back through our archives and look for that. 'Cause I know, although, tarot is also Moebius's art, but not his story.
No, neither. So A Land Called Tarot is unrelated entirely. It's Image.
Oh, okay.
It's
that's Image. Oh, sorry then. Wait, what am I getting confused with? The Jodorowsky, the other Jodorowsky
I'm glad you
book.
brought this up, because A Land Called Tarot is, if you liked that book at all, and please go back and listen to that episode. You said it was 60 what?
61.
61. That's one of those books that has no words at all, like no speech bubbles, and it's very, very abstract, and it's beautiful imagery, and it's very, very dreamy. Just like this, I read A Land Called Tarot. I'm like, man, I've dreamed of some of these places. Like I've seen some of these places, in my head when I sleep, and it's just kind of cool to sort of let somebody take you back there. So in much the same way, even though Edena has, there's dialogue and there's text, there's a lot of scenes that are very sort of, you just kind of have to figure out for yourself what's going on, much like A Land Called Tarot. And I think that's another great reference. If you like that, you'll definitely like this. But yeah, no, sadly unrelated, but you could maybe argue the author artist was a Moebius fan, or was definitely inspired by it, because there's some connective tissue just thematically going on.
Right. And maybe that's why it just sprung to mind, because when you were reviewing that, you probably talked about Inkle and other works like that. But yeah, cool. I think that just about does it.
Yeah.
If people want to find those old episodes, you can go to panelism.inc. And you can also find us on Instagram at panelism.inc, INK. You were about to add something.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, I even having gone through it, I hopefully you like it, but I still feel like I'm leaving so much on the table, but that's okay. I think part of this is it's an audio podcast describing some amazing pieces of art that you just have to see with your own eyes, and I just got to trust in that. Well,
and yeah, exactly. And I mean, part of our mission is to just kind of like shine a light on some of that stuff. And it is visual art. So, one thing you and I do constantly when we bring up books that the other has not read is just Google it to look at images and go, ooh, I like the style of this, and add it to the wish list or whatever. So that's how you, the listener, should be doing this too, I think. If something piques your interest, just Google it, check out the images, because it's all about like what connects to you visually. This is a huge thing that we talk about all the time. Like, if the art doesn't connect with us, we can't get into the story. Yeah, 100%. Well, it's been great. Go pick up The World of Edena by Moebius at your local comic book store. And we'll be back next time with another episode. It's been great talking to you. All right. We'll see you then, or we'll see you at another time.